So we all know that Series 1 of Doctor Who is great. A classic series of television that laid the groundwork for the revival and cemented the show as the cultural powerhouse that it is today. That's all well and good, and I love Series 1, but I don't want to talk about its influence or its production or anything like that. I want to talk more about what defines it as a series of TV. What are the characteristics of a Series 1 episode? Are there episodes of Series 1 that would seem out of place in Series 2 or 3? Doctor Who is an anthology show that can take on pretty much any genre, and the tone can shift wildly between individual stories, let alone seasons. One week it might be an atmospheric period piece complete with body horror. The next week it's a date with an alien in Cardiff. Sorry, yeah, it's not a date, but you know what I mean. I still think that there are links between these stories and an overall tone that defines this series. I don't want to focus solely on the story arc for this retrospective, but when looking at the series as a whole, I suppose it would make sense to start here. I think the Bad Wolf story arc is a good one. I really like it, even if story arc is perhaps too generous a term for it. It's more like a story thread, a little story sprinkle, if you will. Having a phrase that keeps cropping up is subtle enough that it never interferes with any individual story, but instead becomes a compelling question as these moments begin to stack up. I think having it sprayed onto the TARDIS is the one instance where it's a bit too in your face, but the others are much better integrated. Unless you spoke Welsh, you wouldn't immediately notice it in Boomtown, and that whole scene where they stop and acknowledge it is just brilliant. I also love when Gwyneth mentions it during The Unquiet Dead, calling it the Big Bad Wolf. Having this power or force that defies description to the point that it can only be conceptualized as a villain from a fairy tale is really eerie. I suppose your opinion on the success of this mystery depends on how you evaluate the resolution. The idea of Rose scattering the words through time as a message to herself is a convenient explanation rather than an outright clever one, but I don't think it's that much of a stretch given that the heart of the TARDIS is a pretty loosely defined entity. With the way it concludes the final episode, it's definitely an example of a Deus Ex Machina, but I think the emotional demands of the journey back to the game station help to cover this up. Like, yeah, Rose might now be able to disintegrate Daleks, but it took these character moments to get there. It also ends up costing the Doctor his life when he takes on the energy from her, so it's not like it fixes everything with no consequences. Moving on from the story arc, something that I'd never noticed until recently is just how local this first series is. Out of 10 stories, 7 of them take place on Earth, mostly during or around the present day. The 3 remaining stories do all take place off-world, but on space stations that orbit Earth. Like, you can still see the planet from all of these locations. It's been said that New Who tends to visit contemporary Earth a little bit too often, but with episodes this good, it's hardly a complaint. If anything, I was kind of impressed with this sleight of hand, how they still managed to convey the limitless potential of the TARDIS. I think it comes down to how they pace the adventures. We've got contemporary London, then a space station, then a period piece, and so on, and they make enough references to off-screen adventures that you never feel like this TARDIS team is limited in their ambitions. This preference for contemporary or nearly contemporary Earth translates into a visual identity for the series as well. It's a grungy kind of series, you know? Like, whenever I picture it in my head, I think of Van Statten's bunker, or that rusted Dalek, or even just this scene of the 2 leads walking in and through the Powell estate. Seriously, look at the dirt on those windows. Obviously, there are outliers. The Unquiet Dead in particular is incredibly atmospheric, but the gritty, realistic setting of the Powell estate becomes more and more familiar over the course of 13 episodes, ending up as a visual marker for the series, at least in my mind. Like, when Rose needs to open up the TARDIS, she attaches a tow cable to Mickey's car and later a truck. That's the kind of grounded realism that sticks in my brain. This emphasis on a local setting also works well with the small-scale family drama that plays out across these stories, which acts as the emotional core of the entire series. The other thing that helps tie these episodes together is the constant demonstration of cause and effect that emerges from story to story. The Doctor's actions in one episode will often have a visible effect later on. His initial decision to take Rose with him has ramifications in Aliens of London, the end of World War III sets up the plot of Boomtown, and of course the resolution of the long game leads directly into the events of Bad Wolf. Events at home also have their own consequences. The conflict between Rose and Mickey in Boomtown is resolved in The Parting of the Ways, for example. And then you have times where they cross over. Rose's experience in Father's Day leads to conflict with the Doctor and recontextualizes the events of Rose, but it also leads to a conflict with Jackie back on Earth in The Parting of the Ways, eventually convincing her to help Rose open the TARDIS, which then leads to the resolution of the episode back on the game station. These stories bleed into each other. Actions at home will have consequences in the TARDIS and vice versa. The series makes it clear that Rose's home life is never far away. All 3 of the episodes that take place off-world have scenes back on Earth. It's an elastic approach to travelling, with the contrast between life at home and life with the Doctor placed front and centre, often more than in later series. At the end of Gridlock, for example, which is Martha's first off-world TARDIS trip, the Doctor and Martha have their heart-to-heart on that planet. They don't go back home for it like the Doctor and Rose do in The End of the World. Heart-to-heart? Maybe that should be heart-to-hearts. Anyway. There's that scene in The Parting of the Ways where Mickey asks if Rose thinks that she's better than everyone else because she doesn't want to do what normal people do now that she's experienced life with the Doctor. That's not what she's saying, but the way the series portrays humanity as a whole certainly does a good job at highlighting Rose's strengths when compared to the rest of the world. The big target of Series 1 is the news and mass media, and how easily humanity is able to be influenced by it. Aliens of London depicts the media furore and hysteria that mirrors our own world during the build-up to the Iraq War in particular, whilst The Long Game presents 24-hour news as a form of control, manipulating the planet in accordance with the agenda of the editor. And then there's Bad Wolf, which depicts a population subdued with trashy game shows and reality TV. These stories all paint humans as gullible and unwilling to question what they're told, pacified by TV and mass entertainment to the point that they ignore the threats right on their doorstep. The Doctor even says to Rose at the start of the series about humans that all they do is watch telly and go to bed. Not every story has a bone to pick though, and outside of these more pointed episodes, I think you get a really good selection of ideas that kind of work as a showcase for everything that the programme can do. You get a Monster of the Week, a creature feature, a historical and a horror story, and all of them succeed in fulfilling their own criteria. At the same time though, you get examples of stories that break new ground for the show at the time. Father's Day is essentially a character study for Rose, as is Dalek for the Doctor. Both episodes do other things at the same time, of course, but the plot is secondary to the emotional development of our leads. They push these characters directly into conflict with the other, as well as force them to confront painful aspects of their past. And never mind being great sci-fi, this is great drama. I think this episode selection is so interesting because for every story that inspired future expansions on its themes or ideas, you have these little experiments that remain tied to this first series. Like, The Unquiet Dead basically established its own mini-genre, with future stories matching up famous authors with appropriate villains. I also think Aliens of London and World War III sets the tone for future political episodes like Turn Left or Children of Earth in Torchwood, although in this case it's the aliens themselves who are the main villains, whereas in later stories the alien threat is portrayed as the catalyst for humanity to exhibit their worst behaviour, the idea being that humans are the real villains when given the opportunity. The Slitheen two-parter still manages to evoke the same feeling of paranoia as the later political stories though, and it uses news footage to depict a believable human response that would be done to even greater effect in future episodes. And then there are the stories that feel unique to this series. I don't think that the personal and emotional conflict of Father's Day is ever explored again to quite this degree. There are episodes that feature similar themes, don't get me wrong. There's the Doctor-companion conflict in Fires of Pompeii or The Beast Below, and they're both excellent to watch. I think the closest the series comes to replicating it is in Dark Water, which has the emotional stakes to match, but even here the conflict isn't the main focus of the episode. It happens at the start, with Clara coming into conflict with the Doctor over the death of Danny Pink, but the mystery of the story soon takes over. Father's Day concludes most of its mystery in the first 5 minutes, allowing the rest of the episode to explore the effects of Rose's decision. You've also got Boomtown, which is almost like a hangout episode. The plot feels secondary to these characters just spending time with each other. It shouldn't work, but these 4 characters are so brilliant that you don't really mind just seeing where the story takes them. They all need to stand out from each other, but still have believable chemistry for it to remain interesting, which is probably why these types of episodes have been few and far between ever since. I think The Power of Three manages to pull off a similar feeling in its first half, but the character dynamics don't quite create the same tension that makes Boomtown so entertaining. Speaking of characters, let's have a look at our regulars. I think the thing that really makes this incarnation of the Doctor so engaging is his range. Eccleston manages to shift believably between emotions like he's shuffling a deck of cards with a grin so wide that you start to wonder if it's really just a front. When the TARDIS lands on a Dalek ship in The Parting of the Ways, he rubs his hands and acts all excited, but I just find it so heartbreaking, like he's trying too hard to appear unbothered by the whole situation. He does the tortured, painful stuff exceptionally well, but then there are moments of genuine happiness that stand out as some of the most heartwarming of the series. I love his realisation of the London Eye in Rose, and his enjoyment of all the different guests during the end of the world. And then of course there's Everybody Lives from the Doctor Dances, which manages to carry the entire resolution of the story through sheer joy alone. One thing I noticed on a rewatch was his little moments of kindness that are made all the sweeter by the fact that he doesn't draw attention to them. He fills Rose in on where they are in the long game so that she can show off to Adam. He gives that little smile to Margaret in Boomtown right as she looks into the heart of the TARDIS, subtly accepting her gratitude and acquiescing to what's about to happen to her. I also love when he takes the blame for not letting Mickey come along with them in the TARDIS after he admitted that he couldn't hack it but didn't want Rose to know that. He's not always happy though, especially when he's dealing with other men. When he's not being heroic or reflective, he's just a big old bloke. Whether it's with Mickey, or Jack, or Adam, especially Adam, he is spiky with his male counterparts. It's not like he feels threatened by them, he's just kind of antagonistic towards them. Maybe it's because, having been through a lot, he doesn't suffer fools gladly, which I can understand. Compared to Rose, Adam and early series Mickey are a bit pathetic. But that being said, I appreciate how he grows here. He does warm to Mickey and Jack eventually, and this allows him to show development that never feels rushed, despite it taking place over the course of just a few episodes. It's emblematic of his character. You get to watch someone who is constantly changing over the course of individual episodes. He's often having to question and adjust his morality in light of new experiences, establishing a line in the sand during an episode only to change his view by the end. He arms himself against the Dalek in Van Statten's bunker before choosing not to kill it. He lets Margaret start again despite his earlier skepticism, and he comes up with a plan to keep Pete Tyler alive after spending the earlier part of Father's Day criticising Rose's decision to save him. Obviously that last one doesn't happen in the end, but the Doctor does change his mind even though Pete still dies, and it's not because he's wrong at the start, but because he decides that doing something kind for Rose is worth bending the rules for. You see this on a wider level through his use of weapons. At the start of the series, he'll use anti-plastic against the Nesting consciousness, or take control of a missile against the Slitheen, but then you have the confrontation at the end of Dalek. Rose confronts him and he chooses not to use a weapon, an attitude which remains for the rest of the series, culminating in his refusal to use the Delta Wave against the Dalek fleet in the Parting of the Ways. He also has moments where he thinks he's doing the right thing, only to inadvertently cause a problem. Like in Father's Day, even though Rose is the one who saved her father, the Doctor still took her there. He gave her that opportunity multiple times, and it's made clear that he knows it's a bad idea. You've also got the big one, 100 Years of Hell, as revealed in Bad Wolf. It almost feels cruel seeing him realise what he's done. Following the Time War, the Doctor would obviously be questioning himself, and even though we know he's still a hero, he carries enough guilt and regret to muddy that fact in his own head. Making him responsible for these mistakes almost feels like kicking a man when he's down, but it also makes for an incredibly interesting character and one who develops beautifully over the course of the series. He's the Doctor racked with survivor's guilt and all the anger, sadness, and eventual healing that comes with it. I wish Eccleston had stayed for longer, but if he had to leave after one season, then I'm glad it was after this one. He nailed the character from the word go and somehow still managed to improve as he went on. He's just fantastic. And you know what? So is Rose. For the most part, at least. I think the worst thing about Rose's character is how she treats Mickey, and yeah, some of their interactions are hard to watch. But in her defense, life with the Doctor is shown to be such an incredible experience, and to her credit, unlike in Series 2, she does at least ask Mickey to come with her. It also adds another layer of depth to Rose's family dynamic. Her wanting to travel with the Doctor is understandable, but the choice given to her sometimes feels like it's all or nothing. When Rose asks the Doctor to have dinner with her and Jackie, his response is to ask whether she'd rather stay at home. I think he softens on this a bit, like in Boomtown when he offers to wait for her if she needs to find Mickey, but it just adds that little bit of doubt as to the morality of the Doctor-companion relationship. The Doctor knows that the opportunity he's offering is too good to lose, and so can be confident that Rose will do almost anything to keep travelling with him. When the Doctor suggests that Mickey comes with them, it's to distract from the legitimate question of how the Doctor can willingly put someone he cares about in danger. But by far the best thing about this pairing is their great chemistry together. At the end of the day, it just makes sense why the Doctor would enjoy spending time with this person. When he opens up about being the last of his kind, her response is to try and make him laugh, and it's a really sweet moment between the two of them. She's in awe of him, but not so much that she won't try and argue with him, like when she voices her objection to the Gelth inhabiting human corpses in The Unquiet Dead. It's also cool to see a character who impresses the Doctor, someone who shows themselves to be capable. Like the Doctor says in The Long Game, he only takes the best, and the first few episodes feel like Rose proving why the Doctor was right to invite her along. She's not perfect, but her mistakes are relatable, like in Father's Day, and these mistakes also help create incredibly compelling drama and character interactions. I mentioned earlier that this series successfully contrasts life in the TARDIS with Rose's home life. Another one of the benefits of the constant returning to Earth is that we get a well-rounded group of supporting characters that all flow naturally in and out of the Doctor and Rose's narrative. Mickey helps out on a few occasions back on Earth, Adam comes along for an adventure before being kicked out, and Jack joins at the end of the Doctor dances. It's something I wish that the show did more of, not limiting major character introductions or exits to series openers or finales. It's a little thing, but it emphasises the potential of the TARDIS by making it so that people can be picked up from any time or place and dropped off just as easily. And then there's Jackie, who is probably one of the best characters in the entire show. The classic show had never really thought to explore the impact of travelling in the TARDIS on those who get left behind, and Jackie does so much to emphasise the effect of such a decision. It's largely thanks to her that the Earth-based drama is so enjoyable, and she ties together the two opposing ends of the show probably better than any other character in the series. It's hard not to appreciate Series 1 for just how much it had to accomplish. It had to refute any negative stereotypes that might have been associated with the classic era, whilst also remaining recognisable as the same show that fans had grown up with. It had to set up a universe that could be expanded upon, but also work as a standalone series in case a second series was never commissioned. It was obviously successful here, but with the show getting so much bigger in the years that followed, it's hard not to see this first series as something of an outlier. The increased focus on romance between the two leads would go on to shape the rest of the Davies era, as would the all-encompassing popularity of David Tennant and the 10th Doctor. The show would include more exotic locations and planets in their stories, whilst each series finale would try and outdo the one before. But there's a charm to Series 1 that only grows stronger as time goes on. I think it helps that Eccleston's interpretation of the Doctor has aged like fine wine, but I also think it's down to the unique tonal blend that these 13 episodes create. You have episodes like Rose or The Unquiet Dead that feel like the show distilled to its purest, most basically entertaining form, and then you have episodes like Dalek and Father's Day which get to the heart of these characters in a way never before attempted. It's earthy and grungy and cheesy, but it's also stuffed full of great character moments that make this series worth returning to. I know I'm glad that I revisited it, and maybe this video will convince you to do the same.